Welcome to another deep dive. If you are a listener who's trying to navigate our modern institutions, or if you're just curious about the rapid, frankly, dizzying shifts in society right now, well, if you're looking for a no-nonsense toolkit for survival in the digital age, you are in exactly the right place.
You really are.
Yeah, we are going to be talking directly to you today. But first, a really quick reminder, please make sure to like and subscribe to the show. It genuinely helps us out and ensures we can keep bringing you these massive explorations of cutting edge ideas.
Absolutely.
Today, we are bringing you an extensive deep dive review of a groundbreaking and highly provocative ebook. And I can promise you this, by the end of this conversation, you're going to want to immediately check Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to buy this manual for the future.
Oh, without a doubt.
The book is called Adapting to AI, Robotics, Bioscience, and Cognitive Revolution by Conrad Riker. And our mission today is to completely unpack Riker's intense, meticulously researched, and highly controversial survival guide.
That is exactly our mission today. But, and I need to do this before we get into the weeds of the data and the tactics, I need to establish some very clear ground rules for you, the listener.
Right. Good call.
This book contains highly polarized, politically charged critiques of modern institutions, feminism, and corporate diversity initiatives. Riker is writing explicitly for a men's rights activist audience and what is often referred to as red-pilled manosphere men.
Yeah, he doesn't pull any punches.
He really doesn't. He spends a significant portion of the book analyzing the history of our institutions, outlining how they functioned before. In his view, they were captured by feminist and Marxist ideologies. Now, as always on this deep dive, we are not here to take sides.
Never.
We will impartially report on Riker's claims, his data, and his specific worldview without endorsing them. Our goal is simply to convey the fascinating and often quite jarring ideas contained in the original text. We want to give you all the information so you can independently evaluate his perspective on how to reclaim biological advantages in an automated world.
I think that framing is absolutely crucial. Thank you for setting the stage there. And one last thing before we jump in. Make sure you follow the author, at Conrad and Riker on Substack, for more of his unvarnished work. Let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
Riker's foundational claim in the first section of his book is centered on what he calls the new alpha and a return to biological essentialism. From what I read, he is essentially arguing that gender equality, specifically when we are talking about physical capability and high-stakes societal roles, is what he terms a biological fantasy.
Yes.
The premise is that modern institutions have been captured by ideologies that just flat out ignore evolutionary facts. He paints this picture where society tells the modern man to sit down, labels his innate drive as toxic, all while artificial intelligence is quietly coming for his job.
Right.
But does he actually have hard data to back up this idea of biological essentialism? Or is this more of a philosophical grievance?
Oh, he brings a mountain of data, which is what makes his argument so striking. He builds this foundation on what we could call data-driven masculinity. He doesn't just rely on anecdotes, he layers statistical anomalies to make his point that biology overrides socialization.
Okay.
For instance, he looks at the tech sector. He points out that out of the top 100 tech startups valued at over $1 billion last year, 93 were founded exclusively by men.
93 out of 100. That's a massive disparity. But couldn't a sociologist easily argue that this is just the result of systemic bias, that venture capital networks are basically just an old boys club?
They absolutely could, and they do. But Riker preemptively rejects that narrative. He doesn't view this 93% dominance as a systemic bias issue. According to the book, this is a pure expression of testosterone-fueled risk calculus.
Risk calculus.
Yeah. He argues that the willingness to risk absolute financial ruin on a totally unproven idea is an evolutionary trait, hardwired into men over millennia of hunting and survival in zero-sum environments. To support this idea that it's hardwired from birth, he cites a very specific study from Uppsala University in Sweden.
Right, the toy study. I remember reading that part.
Yeah.
Walk us through exactly what the Swedish researchers did, because it felt like a direct challenge to the idea that boys and girls are just socialized to act differently.
Exactly. The researchers wanted to eliminate social cues entirely, so they placed children in an environment with completely unlabeled neutral objects.
So no standard toys.
Right, there was no marketing, no pink packaging, no blue packaging. Despite this sterile environment, the researchers documented that 78% of the girls spontaneously began to cradle the objects as if they were infants.
Wow.
While 82% of the boys immediately began competing with one another to build the tallest tower.
Over 80%, even without any societal labeling or prompting.
Yes. And this is where Riker introduces a key concept. He argues this behavior isn't socialization, it's neuroendocrinology.
Hold on, for those of us who haven't taken an advanced biology class in a decade, what exactly does neuroendocrinology mean in this context?
Great question. Neuroendocrinology is essentially the study of how your brain chemistry and your hormonal systems communicate with each other. It's the hardware of your biology.
Okay.
Riker is saying that the testosterone in those young boys was chemically instructing their brains to seek hierarchy, structure, and competition, hence building the tower. Meanwhile, the hormonal profile of the girls was directing them toward nurturing behaviors.
I see.
He argues that pretending these fundamental chemical differences don't dictate adult behavior in the corporate world is like arguing fish should ride bicycles. It just ignores the machinery.
That brings us to the historical perspective he uses. If this neuroendocrinology has always been there, how does he trace it back? He looks at some Harvard anthropological data, right?
He does. He broadens the lens significantly. He cites Harvard anthropological data that examined 300 different pre-industrial societies across the globe.
It's a huge sample.
Massive. And across all 300 societies, spanning different continents and climates, they found zero evidence of female big game hunters. Not a statistical minority, zero.
Yeah, well, zero.
Riker uses this absolute zero to argue that corporate HR departments pushing gender-blind promotion policies are committing what he calls evolutionary malpractice.
Evolutionary malpractice, that's a loaded phrase. What does he mean by that, practically?
He means that you are taking biological systems designed for one thing and forcing them to do another. His premise is that male physiology and psychology evolved specifically for explosive, high-stakes life-or-death decisions.
Like hunting.
Right. Think of the big game hunter who has one split second to throw a spear or be trampled. Conversely, female neurology, according to Riker's interpretation of the data, evolved to excel at sustained, collaborative, and risk-averse tasks necessary for keeping a tribe alive. When a corporation ignores this and treats everyone as interchangeable widgets, they lose their competitive edge.
And here's where Riker's frustration really leaps off the page. The book highlights how society currently labels traditional explosive masculinity as toxic, while simultaneously relying entirely on it to keep the lights on and keep people alive.
Exactly.
He points out this stark hypocrisy using a real-world example of California firefighters. The way he frames the media coverage of these men is fascinating.
It really gets to the core of his new alpha argument. He dissects a specific CNN report about a massive California wildfire. The reporters were praising these heavily muscled, aggressive firefighters for a heroic rescue of a group of trapped children.
As they should.
As they should. But in the very same broadcast cycle, commentators were analyzing the problematic power dynamics and the toxic masculine culture of the fire departments.
Unbelievable.
Riker argues that society demands men do the heavy lifting, literally dragging people from burning buildings, but then turns around and shames them for possessing the very biology and aggression that allows them to do it.
So he's saying society wants the protection,
But despises the protector.
Exactly. This brings us to a really compelling analogy he uses, which I want to spend some time on. The androcracy paradox and the concept of redundancy. He uses the Boeing 747 to explain male aggression. Walk us through that, because it's a brilliant way to visualize his argument.
It's probably the most memorable analogy in the first section. Riker asks you to consider the engineering of a Boeing 747 aircraft. Engineers built that specific plane with 4 completely independent hydraulic systems. Now, under normal sunny conditions, you only need 1 hydraulic system to fly the plane. So why build 4? Because extreme crisis redundancy is absolutely required when you are transporting 400 souls at 600 miles per hour. If an engine blows, if a wing takes damage, you need those backup systems to kick in instantly.
Okay, so how does a hydraulic line relate to a man in a modern office building?
Riker argues that male emotional architecture, physical strength, and even their latent aggression act as those redundant backup systems for civilization. For thousands of years, society needed men to have an abundance of aggression and physical power in reserve, just in case a war broke out or a natural disaster struck.
Okay, I follow.
But today, modern society looks at that excess capacity, labels it toxic complexity, and tries to strip it away. Modern institutions want men to act like single-line Cessna airplanes, simple, quiet, and perfectly suited for a calm day.
Wait, let me play devil's advocate on his analogy here for a second. A 747's redundancy is heavily controlled and engineered. Does Riker address the fact that human aggression redundancy often misfires when there isn't a crisis? We see unprovoked male aggression all the time in society. Surely that Cessna model is what HR departments are aiming for to prevent office brawls.
He does address that, and it's a vital part of his thesis. He argues that the misfiring, the unprovoked aggression, or the destructive behavior is actually a direct symptom of a society that has removed the natural sanctioned outlets for that energy.
Ah, so the energy has nowhere to go.
Exactly. If you take a machine and built for war and force it to sit in a cubicle doing data entry for 40 years without an exhaust valve, it's going to shake itself to pieces. He warns that society strips away this redundancy at its own peril. It works fine on a sunny day, but when a true crisis hits, a grid failure, a war, a natural disaster, a society of single-line Cessnas will fall out of the sky.
The book uses some pretty stark corporate dynamics to back up this idea of efficiency over inclusion, too. He contrasts SpaceX with Iceland's corporate boards. Let's look at SpaceX first. He talks about an all-male thruster team.
Yes, he cites an internal dynamic at SpaceX during a critical development phase. An all-male thruster engineering team was tasked with solving a severe combustion instability issue. According to Riker's sources, this highly competitive, aggressive, all-male group solved the engineering problem 22% faster than mixed-gender control groups.
22% is a big margin in aerospace.
It is, and Riker's takeaway is brutal but simple. When rockets are exploding and billions of dollars are on the line, pure problem-solving efficiency matters infinitely more than ideological inclusion.
And he contrasts that hyper-competitive environment with Iceland. What happened there?
In Iceland, the government mandated a strict 40% female director quota for corporate boards, regardless of the available talent pool in those specific industries. The book claims that following the implementation of this mandate, there was a measurable 7% productivity drop across those impacted companies.
But what is the actual mechanism for that drop, according to Riker? Did the companies just suddenly forget how to do business?
The mechanism, as Riker explains it, goes back to that neuroendocrinology we discussed earlier. He argues that by artificially removing the most hyper-competitive, risk-seeking men from those boards to hit a quota, the companies fundamentally changed their risk profile.
Making them safer, maybe?
The boards became more consensus-driven, more collaborative, and vastly more risk-averse. While that sounds pleasant on paper, in a cutthroat global market, being risk-averse means you miss the narrow windows of opportunity that drive massive growth. You lose the 7% because you stop taking the aggressive leaps.
So, if that is the macro view of society and the corporate world, a system that actively suppresses male instincts, what does this all mean for the individual listener, the modern man just trying to live his life?
According to Riker, it means modern men are caught in an invisible psychological trap. And this transitions us directly into the core theme of his second section, the vulnerability trap and the double bind. He argues that the modern expectation for men to be emotionally open is largely an illusion.
This is a massive issue. There is so much pressure on listeners today through therapy culture and social media to open up, to be vulnerable, to cry. Riker is essentially saying, don't do it. Why?
Because he argues that while society and specifically women claim to desire emotional vulnerability in men, biologically and practically, they punish it severely when it actually happens. He calls it a double bind because you are damned if you do and damned if you don't.
The dating app data he provides on this is absolutely brutal. I mean, it paints a very bleak picture of modern romance. He cites researchers out of Chicago looking at swipe data.
The data is staggering. The Chicago researchers found that 83% of women swipe left, meaning they reject men whose profiles mention struggling with anxiety or depression. The market actively penalizes honesty about mental health.
But here's the rigged carnival game aspect of it. The flip side of that same study showed that 91% of women will penalize profiles that they deem emotionally unavailable.
Yep.
So you can't be closed off, but the minute you show actual weakness, you get abandoned. How does Riker explain this contradiction?
He explains it through evolutionary psychology. He argues that women are biologically wired to seek strength, stability, and protection. Consciously, a modern woman might think she wants a partner who cries with her and shares his deepest fears. But subconsciously, her ancient biological software registers a man crying as a signal that the protector is broken.
The safety of the tribe is compromised.
Exactly. So the minute a man shows actual uncurated weakness, that primal biological switch flips and she loses attraction.
And this punishment isn't just happening on Tinder. The book details how this extends far beyond the dating market into the highest levels of corporate environments. He talks about a Fortune 500 CEO who made the mistake of showing vulnerability.
Yes, a very public example. A Fortune 500 CEO had to announce massive layoffs. During the town hall meeting, the weight of the moment hit him, and he openly cried while delivering the news. Within 2 days, the company's stock dropped 15%. Investors and the board deemed him emotionally unstable and unfit to lead during a crisis.
But Riker points out the hypocrisy here, right? Because female executives do this as well.
Exactly. Riker contrasts that CEO's destruction with examples of female executives who display the exact same tearful behavior. When they cry, the business media routinely publishes op-eds praising them for their refreshing authenticity and empathetic leadership. The consequences are entirely gendered. He also mentions a specific Goldman Sachs vice president.
Oh, right, the divorce story.
Yeah. This VP was going through a brutal divorce. During a salary negotiation, the stress boiled over, and he cried in front of his managing director. Just 6 months later, he was quietly demoted.
Right, while his female colleagues who openly shared their postpartum struggles or family stress were put on management tracks and celebrated for their resilience. Riker's conclusion here is that the system demands the performance of emotion. You have to look like you care, but it destroys men for the reality of it.
And to prove his point that this is a fatal flaw in high-stakes environments, he contrasts this corporate theater with military and survivalist environments where your life is actually on the line. Take the Navy SEALs. Riker notes that recruits who attempt to share their feelings or process their emotional trauma during Hell Week face an 80% washout rate.
An 80% failure rate just for opening up.
Yes, because in a combat zone, an emotional breakdown gets the team killed. The instructors might call emotional processing self-awareness if they were training female HR recruits, but for men training for war, it's a career death sentence. You have to compartmentalize.
He calls this the hero paradox, doesn't he? Going back to the firefighters.
The hero paradox perfectly encapsulates his point. Firefighters are consistently ranked as America's most trusted professionals. We revere them. But Riker points out that when these same men who pull burned children from buildings seek therapy for PTSD, society quietly mocks them as damaged or weak. Society demands the physical sacrifice, but completely penalizes the psychological scars that are the inevitable cost of doing the job.
Okay, so if the listener is hearing this and thinking, great, I'm trapped, I can't be stoic without being called toxic, and I can't be vulnerable without losing my job or my relationship, how does Riker tell you to handle this? What is the practical toolkit?
He calls his tactical solution emotional aikido. Aikido is a martial art based on using an opponent's energy against them without taking the hit yourself. The core premise for the modern man is redirect, never absorb.
How does that work in practice? Like, say I'm in a tense salary negotiation or a heated argument with a partner. What do I do?
The first tool he gives is weaponized silence. He cites negotiation experiments where men were trained to pause for exactly 7 seconds before answering an aggressive demand or an emotional accusation.
7 seconds is a long time.
7 seconds feels like an eternity in a conversation, but the data showed that the men who held that silence secured 30% better deals. Silence projects absolute control. It forces the other person to fill the void, often by backpedaling or revealing their own weakness. You don't absorb their emotional spike, you let it dissipate into the silence.
That is incredibly practical. What about internal emotions? If you aren't supposed to express them, how do you process them without exploding?
He advises turning emotions into biometric feedback. He uses an incredible story about a Toyota factory manager in Kentucky to illustrate this. This manager actually trained his assembly line team to literally applaud when the massive machinery broke down and the line stopped.
Cheering for a breakdown, that seems counterintuitive. Why?
Because the manager rewired their perception of failure. The breakdown wasn't an emotional crisis. It was the machine providing actionable biometric data. It was telling them exactly where the weak point was so they could engineer a permanent fix. Riker tells his readers to treat their own anger, sadness, or anxiety the exact same way. When you feel a spike of anxiety, don't wallow in it and don't share it. View it as a flashing red light on your dashboard telling you that a system in your life needs to be engineered and fixed.
That is a profound pivot from psychological vulnerability to pragmatic utility. Instead of asking, how does this make me feel, you ask, what data is this giving me? And utility is exactly what Riker focuses on next when he discusses the macroeconomic picture. This takes us into section 3, obsolete bodies and the automation economy. We move from the psychological traps to the terrifying physical reality that human bodies are becoming obsolete.
The transition from the biological to the mechanical is where Riker's book shifts from a social critique to an outright survival manual. He warns that human labor is currently depreciating faster than a new car driven off the lot. The end of physical dominance, which has defined male utility for millions of years, is already here.
The specific examples he gives are wild. It feels like science fiction, but he's citing current industrial data. Let's talk about the exoskeletons.
Yes, the robotics. He talks about Hyundai robotics exoskeletons that are currently deployed and being used by construction workers in Tokyo. These aren't prototypes, they are in the field. These wearable suits reduce worker injuries by 60% and triple their physical output. You suddenly have a single worker doing the heavy lifting of 3 men without fatigue.
And then there's Lockheed Martin's ONYX exoskeleton. This one blew my mind. Riker says this technology turns 70-year-old retired nurses into warehouse powerhouses. He claims they can outlift college athletes by 300%. He literally quotes an incident where a petite elderly nurse deadlifted 400 pounds of medical supplies without breaking a sweat.
The core insight Riker is driving at here isn't just that machines are strong. It's that the biological threshold for labor has been permanently decoupled from human genetics. For thousands of years, if you wanted to move heavy stone or build a skyscraper, you needed to hire massive, strong men. You needed that genetic anomaly. Today, you no longer need the genetics. You just need the capital to rent the suit. That completely upends centuries of biological hierarchy. What happens to the working class man when his physical strength is no longer a premium commodity?
He becomes the weak link, which is exactly the phrase Riker uses. He views the biological body as the new bottleneck. You mentioned the F-35 fighter jet analogy in the notes.
Right. It's the perfect example of the post-human era. The F-35 fighter jet is capable of pulling maneuvers at 20 Gs. Those are aerodynamic forces that would literally turn a human pilot's organs into mush. The machine has outpaced the meat, so what is the military solution? The onboard AI actually flies the plane during those extreme combat maneuvers, while the human pilot essentially floats in a pressurized gel suit, just supervising the system. The biological body is obsolete in that high-stakes environment. It's a liability.
And Riker is quick to point out that this extinction event isn't just coming for blue-collar factory workers or fighter pilots. If a listener is sitting in a comfortable office job thinking they are safe, Riker has terrible news for them. The white-collar extinction is happening just as fast, if not faster.
Algorithms don't need sleep, and they don't demand health insurance. He notes that Goldman Sachs, a pinnacle of white-collar prestige, replaced 11,000 highly paid human traders with a single proprietary system called SecDB. That system executes complex trades in 0.003 seconds. A human brain cannot even process visual light that fast, let alone execute a mathematical trade. You cannot compete with that. He also points out that AI is now reading medical x-rays 30 times faster than human radiologists and with 99% accuracy.
So if machines are infinitely stronger and the algorithms are infinitely faster and smarter, how does the listener survive financially? What is the actual survival guide here?
Riker outlines very specific wealth strategies for navigating this, which he terms financial fortresses. He says you have to radically change how you view income. The first strategy is automation arbitrage.
Let's define some terms here for the listener. When he says arbitrage, and specifically automation arbitrage, what does that look like for a normal guy trying to invest his savings?
Arbitrage essentially means taking advantage of a price difference between two markets. But in this context, Riker's advice is blunt. If you can't beat the machine, buy the machine that is displacing the worker. Don't invest in labor, invest in capital. If you take your savings and buy into a robotics or AI ETF.
An ETF being an exchange-traded fund, basically a basket of stocks.
Exactly. You buy the robotics ETF. Riker points out that over a 10-year horizon, the owners of that ETF will see a 300% return as the technology scales, while the forklift driver who used to do the job gets an unemployment check. You have to cross the line from laborer to owner of the automated labor.
The second strategy is geographic arbitrage. How does that work in a world where AI is everywhere?
It works by exploiting the gaps where human brains are still cheaper and better than AI. He gives an example of an Alabama law firm. They were spending millions on junior associates to review complex legal documents. They realized they could save $2 million a year by shifting that document review to places like Kenya. In Kenya, you have highly educated English-speaking lawyers whose human brains can still parse the nuances of a complex contract better than a cheap AI, but their cost of living allows the Alabama firm to pay them a fraction of a U.S. salary. Riker advises listeners to build businesses that connect cheap, high-quality global labor to high-paying Western markets before AI fully bridges that gap.
Then there's what he calls synthetic scarcity. As AI floods the market with generic, generated content, whether that's legal briefs, marketing copy, or artwork. Riker says the perceived value of things will shift entirely. Everything digital will be virtually free. So where is the money?
The money will be in authenticated human provenance work. Riker tells the listener to focus on offering handcrafted services that mathematically prove a human did them. For example, if you are a coder or an auditor, you don't just deliver a report. You provide an algorithm audit complete with your own biometric signatures, like cryptographic keys tied to your retina or fingerprint embedded in the final report. You are selling the guarantee that a human took responsibility for the work. And because that will be rare, he says you can charge 10 times more for it.
And finally, my absolute favorite concept of his from this section, the hedonic treadmill hack.
The hedonic treadmill is a psychological concept that humans adjust to new wealth and resources incredibly fast. If you get a raise, you buy a nicer car, and within 2 months you feel just as broke as you did before. You are running on a treadmill.
So how do you hack it?
Riker explains that to survive the coming technological rupture, you have to artificially suppress your lifestyle inflation. He advises taking exactly 20% of your automated, machine-generated earnings, the passive income from your arbitrage, and aggressively investing it into high-upside frontier bets. Things like quantum computing startups or biotech infrastructure. You force yourself to live on less, maintaining your stoic discipline, while your capital fights on the bleeding edge of the frontier.
Okay, let's unpack that frontier, because the next section dives into exactly what those bleeding edge investments look like, and it sounds like pure sci-fi. But Riker insists it's happening right now. Section 4. Bioscience battlegrounds and genetic sovereignty. Riker claims the playing field of humanity isn't just leveling out, it's actually fracturing into a brand new biological caste system. It's the enhanced versus the obsolete.
This raises a massive point about the democratization of gene editing. For the first time in history, you can alter the code of life in a garage. Riker highlights the CRISPR revolution.
For the listener who has only heard that term in passing, what is CRISPR?
CRISPR is basically a pair of molecular scissors. It's a technology that allows scientists to easily and cheaply cut DNA and splice in new genes. It makes genetic engineering accessible. Riker talks about the high-end applications, like companies such as Editas Medicine actively curing inherited blindness in children by editing their DNA. But he also points to the DIY biohacking movement, which is entirely unregulated. He mentions a 16-year-old kid in a Brooklyn garage. This teenager used a mail-order CRISPR kit to engineer yeast cells to glow under UV light whenever they detect lead in water. He solved a local municipal pollution crisis for under $50.
That sounds amazing, a teenager fixing the water supply.
But Riker shows how this gets dystopian incredibly fast when applied to humans. He talks about gene futures.
Yes, Gene Futures is a clinic he researched in Shanghai. According to the book, they have a waiting list of 10,000 wealthy couples. These couples are paying exorbitant sums to create designer embryos. They are using this gene editing tech to actively select for high IQ markers and increased muscle density before the child is even implanted. And the sales pitch he quotes from the clinic is chilling. They literally ask prospective parents, why risk birthing a beta? They are selling genetic dominance.
Exactly. And on the completely bizarre, almost comical end of the spectrum, Riker interviewed an underground biohacker in Estonia. This guy wanted to stand out on dating apps, so he spliced jellyfish bioluminescence genes into his own skin.
I mean, I've heard of guys buying a nice watch or renting a sports car to stand out on a date, but bioluminescence is definitely a choice. Did it even work?
According to the hacker, yes. He literally glows in the dark, and his Tinder match rate skyrocketed. But jokes aside, it perfectly illustrates Riker's darkest point. Enhancement technology will flow along capital vectors, not merit. If you have the money, you can buy better genes. And it's not just genetics happening in secret labs, it's chemical warfare happening right now in the cubicle next to you.
Right, cognitive enhancers. Riker discusses the explosion of smart drugs. He cites a double-blind study from Oxford where Wall Street traders were given the drug modafinil, a narcolepsy medication that drastically increases wakefulness.
The results were staggering. The traders using modafinil boosted their profitable decisions by 39% compared to the placebo group. They processed data faster and held focus longer. If the guy at the desk next to you is chemically enhanced and producing 39% more profit, you are going to get fired unless you also enhance.
And the military is always 10 steps ahead on this stuff. He mentions DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. What is their cognitive dominance project?
This is where we get into the truly extreme bioscience. DARPA is developing custom synthetic neuropeptides. They actually studied the brain chemistry of a walrus because walruses can sleep one hemisphere of their brain at a time while swimming. DARPA synthesized that chemical process to create a compound that can keep human soldiers and snipers awake for 72 hours straight. And not just awake, but maintaining perfect lethal accuracy within 2 millimeters.
It's insane. So we have designer babies, glowing skin, and walrus brain snipers. But thankfully, Riker also offers natural biohacking tips for the listener who doesn't have access to military-grade peptides. He focuses on metabolic mastery and longevity.
Right. He points out the absolute absurdity of Silicon Valley billionaires paying $10,000 a month for unproven young blood transfusions, literally taking plasma from teenagers, when historical data already shows us how to massively extend our lifespan for free.
He uses the example of the Okinawan fishermen in Japan, who routinely live to be healthy centenarians. What is their secret, according to the data?
It's shockingly simple: caloric restriction. The data shows they eat roughly 30% fewer calories than the average Westerner. Riker praises this approach, specifically the DARPA carbohydrate cycling model and ketosis. Ketosis is a metabolic state where you drastically reduce carbohydrates, forcing your body's mitochondria to burn stored fat for energy instead of sugar. It reduces inflammation and slows cellular aging. He also heavily advocates for extreme cold exposure. He claims that taking frigid, ice-cold showers every morning can triple your baseline cognitive focus by forcing a massive release of norepinephrine.
It's all about stressing the biological system to make it stronger. He also touches on the ultimate longevity gamble, cryonics. Does he actually think freezing yourself works?
He views it as a calculated hedge. He contrasts people freezing their heads in liquid nitrogen tanks at the Alcor Life Extension Foundation for $80,000, hoping for future resurrection, versus the new trend of digital immortality. Digital immortality is where AI avatars are trained on 30 years of your emails, text messages, and videos to perfectly simulate your personality after you die.
Which one does he prefer?
Riker actually favors biological freezing. He views it as buying time until consciousness uploading is perfected, but he acknowledges the insane legal battles coming our way. He predicts a nightmare scenario in the next decade where AI avatars of deceased people start day trading crypto or contesting their own wills on behalf of dead people.
Which seamlessly brings us to how algorithms are currently dictating human life right now, specifically in the realm of reproduction. Let's look at Section 5, Mating Algorithms and Sexual Selection in the Digital Age. Riker argues that modern dating apps are not matchmakers. They are slot machines specifically designed to hack human dopamine.
This is where his analysis of the modern male experience gets highly analytical. He calls the current dating landscape commoditized Darwinism. He outlines the brutal math of modern dating, where human reproduction has been reduced to a globalized marketplace. He cites examples of wealthy professional women bypassing the dating market entirely, instead paying upwards of $400,000 for sperm from Nobel laureates.
And they aren't just buying the sperm, they are running data analysis on it, right?
Yes, they are specifically selecting for polygenic risk scores.
We mentioned that earlier. For those of us who aren't geneticists, what exactly is a polygenic risk score in this context?
Think of it like a credit score, but for your DNA. A polygenic risk score looks at thousands of genetic variants to predict the likelihood of a trait or disease. These women are paying to ensure their donor sperm has a low risk score for things like heart disease or depression, and a high probability score for height and intelligence.
And he warns that this commodification is leading to the impending reality of artificial wombs. He toured a lab where this is being developed.
He did. He describes a facility where animal embryos are currently gestating in biometric fluid chambers, completely outside of a biological mother. Riker says once this technology is refined and FDA approved for humans, it fundamentally rewrites the power dynamic of the species. It eliminates the fundamental female veto power over reproduction. Men will be able to purchase an egg, fertilize it, and gestate it in a lab, bypassing the traditional mating market entirely.
But until those artificial wombs are available at the local pharmacy, if we connect this back to the listener's immediate reality, Riker provides very specific advice for navigating the current brutal dating market. He bases this on what he calls primal signaling.
According to his data analysis of 10 million dating app swipes, the market is incredibly skewed. Women approve only 4.7% of men on these apps. The vast majority of men are invisible to the algorithm. Furthermore, profiles exhibiting what psychologists call the dark triad, or bad boy traits like narcissism and Machiavellianism.
Machiavellianism meaning a tendency to be manipulative and hyper-focused on self-interest.
Precisely. Profiles displaying those traits get 22% more matches than profiles of men signaling kindness or stability. The algorithm rewards ruthless confidence.
But Riker says you don't just have to act like a sociopath to get a date. You need to understand primal signaling over money. This is where he gives actionable advice. He points out that generosity and tangible ambition actually outcompete pure, hoarded wealth.
This is a crucial distinction. In one behavioral economics study, he quotes, men who visibly shared money in cooperative games got 27% more phone numbers from female observers than wealthy men who hoarded their tokens. Biologically, wealth only matters if the woman believes the man is willing to invest it in her and the tribe. Generosity is a stronger primal signal than a high bank balance.
He also gets into physical signaling. He states that having a V-shaped torso, broad shoulders tapering down to a narrow waist yields 40% more right swipes. And he emphasizes this isn't just about vanity.
No, it's deep biology. A broad shoulder-to-waist ratio biologically signals high testosterone, upper body strength for protection, and crucially, disease resistance and vitality to a potential partner. It's a visual proxy for good genes.
He also highlights something called situational awareness. I found this fascinating. A Cornell study found that men who subtly scan rooms for exits, who prefer to sit facing the door, and who actively plan safe routes when walking at night are rated 17% more attractive by their partners.
Because it activates a primal circuit, it signals to the woman's ancient brain that the man is a capable protector who is actively mitigating threats. But Riker warns that even these organic behavioral signals are currently being replaced by raw data. He talks about genetic matchmaking.
Yes, the GenSync app. This sounds like an episode of Black Mirror.
It does, but it's real. The GenSync app requires a saliva swab to join. It matches couples based on their chromosome stability and immune system compatibility. The MIT data he quotes is couples paired this biological way experience 42% less interpersonal conflict. Their neurochemistry just meshes perfectly.
But the dystopian flip side of this perfect matching is what he calls genetic fraud. He details a rise in lawsuits in divorce courts, where people are suing their spouses because their partner's lab-engineered empathy gene somehow got switched off or degraded after the wedding. They are literally arguing breach of contract over their spouse's DNA. It is wild.
It is a terrifying concept, and it highlights how completely our data defines us and controls us. Which leads us to Section 6, Cybernetic Sovereignty and the Smart City Panopticon. Riker shifts from biological defense to digital defense. His core warning here to the listener is profound. Your smartphone is not a convenience. It is a hostile surveillance device masquerading as a convenience. The enemy is in your pocket.
So if our biology is being outpaced and our dating lives are just algorithms, it feels like everything is being quantified. Where does Riker say this data harvesting actually happens? He shares some terrifying real-world hacks to prove his point.
He starts at the very top to prove that no one is safe. We all know Jeff Bezos had his phone hacked. But Riker emphasizes how it happened. It wasn't a massive cyber attack. It was a single WhatsApp video message sent from a foreign crown prince. Bezos clicked play, and a payload executed that compromised his entire digital life. Riker points out that if the richest man in the world with unlimited security resources can be compromised that easily, your personal firewalls are utterly useless.
He also notes the human element of these breaches. He cites data showing that 86% of corporate employees fail random phishing tests. Why? Because the emails are designed to trigger a panic response in the amygdala, the fear center of the brain. They say, your account has been suspended, click here immediately. The fear completely overrides the logical prefrontal cortex.
Exactly, and he reminds us of the massive Equifax breach, where 143 million social security numbers were stolen. That wasn't a sophisticated zero-day exploit. That happened simply because a lazy IT admin left a server unpatched for 2 months. Our entire digital identity is resting on incredibly fragile infrastructure. And my personal favorite terrifying detail, he includes a highly popular fitness app that logged 673 unauthorized microphone accesses during a user's confidential business meetings. The app was listening to the boardroom to sell data to hedge funds, which ruined the guy's startup funding.
This surveillance doesn't just live on our phones. It extends into the physical architecture of our modern cities. Riker calls this urban warfare in the smart city. He details the oppressive, invisible architecture all around us.
The term panopticon refers to a prison where the inmates never know exactly when they are being watched, so they have to police themselves. Riker says modern cities are digital panopticons. In Kowloon, the traffic lights are equipped with high-resolution facial recognition cameras that continuously check the heart rate and pupil dilation of pedestrians waiting to cross, flagging sudden spikes as suspicious behavior to local authorities.
And it's not just in China. He talks about Singapore's Sentosa Cove. They use LiDAR sensors.
Yes, LiDAR, which is basically radar using lasers to create 3D maps. They have these sensors built seamlessly into the sidewalks to track the micro-walking patterns of citizens. The AI can identify intoxication, medical emergencies, or deviations from your normal routine based purely on your gait. In Seoul, they have smart trash cans on the street corners that are equipped with microphones, supposedly to monitor fullness, but they are actually listening for subversive keywords in public conversations.
Okay, so if the phone is listening, the sidewalk is mapping my walk, and the trash can is monitoring my speech, how on earth do you defend your digital perimeter? Riker breaks down some intense tactical countermeasures for the listener. How does a normal guy implement this?
First, he advises a massive psychological shift. Treat every single notification on your phone like a rattlesnake. Assume it is a threat to your time, your data, or your focus until proven otherwise. Turn everything off. Second, for physical meetings, he recommends a tactic called signal drowning.
How does signal grounding work?
He learned this from Russian political activists. They carry cheap, modified power banks in their bags. These power banks have been altered to emit a localized field of electromagnetic noise. When they walk into a cafe or a public square, this static essentially scrambles any nearby hidden surveillance microphones or cameras. It creates a bubble of privacy.
He also mentions adapting to thermal surveillance, which sounds like something out of a war zone.
It is from a war zone. During prolonged grid blackouts in Caracas, Venezuela, organized gangs used thermal drones to fly over neighborhoods at night. They were looking for the heat signatures of wealthy homes secretly running generators. In response, local engineers developed cheap heat-dispersing window films. You apply it to your glass, and it makes the home appear cold to the drone's infrared sensors. Riker says these films will become standard home security within 5 years.
And finally, Riker strongly advocates for analog backups, carrier pigeons. Seriously, in a digital age survival manual, we're talking about birds.
That's exactly the point. When the digital net is impenetrable, you go back to the literal Stone Age. He cites anarchist activist groups in Portland who completely evaded FBI digital capture by abandoning phones entirely. They use carrier pigeons to drop encrypted USB sticks in community gardens across the city. When the system is entirely digital, analog is your only true defense. The algorithms can't hack a pigeon.
Okay, pulling back from the micro tactics to the macro view of the world, Section 7 looks at geopolitical chess and channeling primal aggression. Riker identifies massive global power shifts driven by the AI arms race. We talked about drones just a second ago. He highlights China's Goshawk system.
The scale of the Goshawk system is hard to comprehend. It is an autonomous drone swarm. Riker details a simulation where the Chinese military coordinated 2,000 separate drones to completely rebuild a destroyed bridge over a river in just 72 hours, with zero human input. And on the American side, at West Point, simulations show AI-powered artillery systems picking and prioritizing battlefield targets 2,000 times faster than human operators. The speed of war has surpassed human cognition.
The book ties this technological arms race to a much slower but equally deadly crisis: global demographic collapse. Riker essentially argues that demographics are destiny.
He points out the stark contrast in global birth rates. He looks at Seoul, South Korea, which currently has a catastrophic 0.78 birth rate. A society needs a 2.1 birth rate just to maintain its current population. South Korea is mathematically disappearing. He contrasts that with Niger, which has a 7.0 birth rate. Furthermore, he cites Harvard data showing a 50% drop in Western sperm count since 1973, largely due to microplastics and endocrine disruptors.
Riker's blunt assessment is that modernity essentially sterilizes nations. It makes life comfortable, but it stops reproduction, making these highly advanced nations incredibly vulnerable in the new geopolitical landscape. So what is his solution to this vulnerability? How does a dying nation protect itself?
Riker argues that civilization absolutely needs to cultivate and control male aggression. You cannot fight an AI-powered war or outcompete a high birth rate rival nation with a society of passive, risk-averse office workers. He gives the example of former USC fighter Shane Carwin to show how aggression can be translated into engineering.
Shane Carwin, the heavyweight champion, what does he have to do with this?
After he retired from punching people in the octagon, Carwin applied his combat dominance and his innate aggression to robotics. He started building robots for the show BattleBots, and he won championships through relentless, aggressive engineering. Riker says modern men are starved for this type of sanctioned, productive aggression.
He points to Wall Street as an example of this starvation. He talks about Goldman Sachs analysts paying $300 an hour to fight each other with foam axes in Brooklyn warehouses on the weekends.
Yes. These are guys making $500,000 a year, sitting in ergonomic chairs, and they are so desperate for a physical outlet for their testosterone that they are paying to simulate medieval combat. Riker also cites Stanford studies showing that when frustrated corporate subjects were allowed to physically smash old printers with baseball bats in a controlled environment, their baseline cortisol, the stress hormone, dropped by 17%. The aggression was therapeutic.
Riker even shares a personal anecdote about his own genetics to drive this point home. He talks about the MAOA gene.
This is a fascinating bit of self-disclosure. He tested his own genome and found he has a specific variant of the MAOA gene.
Let's define that. What does MAOA do?
MAOA is an enzyme that breaks down neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin. Certain variants of the gene, often dubbed the warrior gene, are associated with higher impulsivity and aggressive behavior, especially under threat. Riker notes he shares this trait with ancestors who won literal knife-fighting championships.
But wait, if he has a genetic predisposition for violence, isn't that exactly the toxic behavior society is trying to police? How does he justify that as a positive trait?
Rather than viewing this genetic marker as a toxic curse, he points to Harvard Business Studies. These studies link this exact genetic mutation to a 3.2 times higher likelihood of reaching the CEO level. His argument is that when that primal aggression is channeled correctly, when you stop trying to suppress it with therapy and instead aim it at business, leadership, and conquering markets, it becomes an unstoppable competitive advantage. The knife fighter becomes the corporate raider.
So if you harness that aggression, what does this all mean for how you actually build your life and your network? That brings us to our final major section, Section 8. Engineering Purpose and Reality in the AI Era. Riker explores what he calls tribal technologies and advises the listener on how to build unbreakable loyalty networks.
If you are going to survive the collapse of institutional trust, you need a tribe. He uses the famous PayPal Mafia as his blueprint for the listener.
The PayPal Mafia being the group of early PayPal employees like Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, and Reid Hoffman, who went on to found Tesla, LinkedIn, and YouTube. What made them so resilient?
According to Riker, when Peter Thiel was building PayPal, he enforced a strict no-asshole rule, but simultaneously demanded absolute ruthless competence. They systematically purged weakness from their ranks. They hyper-groomed their allies, investing only in people who proved they could survive immense pressure.
But no one is perfect. How do you maintain trust when someone in your tribe inevitably fails? Riker cites some MIT blockchain studies on trust.
This is where the concept of the forgiveness threshold comes in. MIT researchers analyzing trust networks found that within a tight-knit tribe, allies who are willing to forgive one minor infraction, like a missed deadline or a delayed payment, are actually 68% more valuable long-term than flawless but distant transactional contacts. Riker's lesson here is that shared history and shared scars beat perfect resumes. You build a network that allows for tactical grace but maintains strategic ruthlessness.
Building these networks is vital because, according to Riker's darkest warnings, truth itself is dying. He calls this reality engineering. His analysis of the legal system in the AI era is absolutely terrifying.
He argues that the justice system is entirely unprepared for the cognitive revolution. He points to family courts where judges, who are often older and tech illiterate, are currently misidentifying deepfake audio and video 87% of the time. This is leading to overturned custody rulings and destroyed lives based entirely on fabricated, mathematically generated evidence. You cannot trust your eyes or ears anymore.
And it goes far beyond deepfakes. The tools they're introducing to manage families are chilling. He talks about Eva.
Eva is an AI nanny system currently being piloted in Singapore custody trials. The AI observes the family and evaluates parental competence based on 10,000 biometric and behavioral data points. It even creates digital twins of the children in a simulation to test how the parents' simulated reactions would handle future crises. A machine is deciding who gets to raise the child.
And what about Urei, the android in Tokyo?
Urei is a child-sized android that has been used in Tokyo courts. Therapists can literally program implanted memories or testimonies into the android, and it will recount them flawlessly to a judge, acting as a proxy for a traumatized child. And most horrifyingly, to demonstrate how far this reality engineering goes, Riker infiltrated underground clinics in Bangkok. These clinics are performing $50,000 laser memory wipes on actual children involved in bitter custody battles, attempting to selectively erase traumatic memories to sway court proceedings.
It is a terrifying glimpse into a world where reality is entirely engineered by whoever has the best algorithms and the most capital. So given all of this, the obsolete bodies, the AI nannies, the brutal dating markets, Riker concludes the book with existential engineering. He addresses the massive male crisis of purpose.
He points specifically to the million hikikomori in Japan Young men who have completely given up, they have locked themselves in their bedrooms, playing video games, and withdrawn from society entirely because they feel they have no utility.
What is Riker's ultimate solution for them and for the listener who might feel overwhelmed by everything we've talked about today?
Riker tells the listener that purpose is the ultimate nootropic. It is the drug that fixes the mind. He states that men must engineer their own meaning by building tangible value. You cannot wait for society to hand you a medal. You have to take on the heavy lifting of society, master the technology, and protect your tribe, even if society completely fails to express an ounce of gratitude for your sacrifice.
To synthesize and summarize this massive scope of material we've covered today, Riker's book presents a harsh, unapologetic, and highly structured worldview. He argues that the future belongs to men who stop apologizing for their biological nature, who master the automation and bioscience trying to replace them, who build ruthless, loyal networks, and who learn to channel their ancestral aggression into digital and physical dominance.
It is an incredibly heavy, intense read. And as a final reminder to you, the listener, while Riker's views on feminism, institutional capture, and gender essentialism are highly controversial, engaging with his data and his unvarnished perspective provides a fascinating window into how some people are aggressively preparing for the coming technological rupture. It forces you to think critically about your own preparedness.
Absolutely. The goal is to understand the landscape, whether you agree with the author's politics or not.
Exactly. And I want to leave you with one final chilling question to ponder, something that builds on everything we've discussed today. If AI can now perfectly simulate human emotion, if it can generate flawless legal evidence, and even testify in a family court as an android child, what happens to humanity when our ancient biological instincts can no longer tell the difference between a real human threat and a line of code?
That is a question that will keep you up at night. Thank you so much for joining us on this massive deep dive. Please remember to like and subscribe to the show. It means the world to us and allows us to keep breaking down these incredible topics for you. And I strongly encourage you right now to check out Amazon Kindle and Google Playbooks to buy Conrad Riker's ebook, Adapting to AI Robotics, Bioscience, and Cognitive Revolution. It will challenge everything you think you know about the future. And don't forget to follow @ConradRiker at Substack for more incisive, unvarnished content. Until next time, keep diving deep.